I'm John Bowden from Rock History Book, and here's our entire interview with the Eagle great Bernie Leadon. He was part of a lot of country rock bands, Hearts and Flowers, Dillard and Clark, the Flying Burrito Brothers, great guitarist, banjo player, mandolin, steel guitar, dobro, and was in that first quartet incarnation of the Eagles with Don Henley, Glenn Frey, Randy Meisner, and Bernie on guitar. He was with them for their first 4 albums. The Eagles in 72, Desperado the following year, On the Border in 74, and One of These Nights, 1975. Here's our chat with the great Bernie Leadon.
Well, I do interviews, and it's not that I don't enjoy them, but I have a full life, and I have a farm, and where I'm sitting today, and I haven't finished mowing in my springtime mowing. I haven't finished that, and so fields are turning. The weeds are getting bigger, and I have to mow them before they go to seed. So I have a friend in California who calls these, quote, gold-plated problems, unquote. But you know what I mean?
Oh,
but,
yeah.
So in other words, but here's my other joke about it is, I worked my ass off to achieve the American dream and have enough money to buy a piece of property, where now I'm going to do pick and shovel work for free for the rest of my life.
Someone sent me something yesterday. I've had my name mispronounced so many times, I'm beginning to wonder if I'm even saying it right. How often do people mispronounce your name? Is it a common thing?
Quite often. I just say, just spell it right on the check, man. It's okay.
Journey of the Sorcerer is one of my all-time favorite songs. I like songs that build, and I was really happy when Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy used it for the series. How did you come up with that tune?
Well, first of all, I'm a banjo player, right? So there's 2 main styles of playing 5-string banjo. You can either pluck it, which is called picking. So the Scruggs style was that. Pete Seeger did plucking and strumming, or picking. And then there's a kind of a strumming style where you strum down with all your fingers across the strings, and then you catch your thumb on the 5th string, which is the highest pitch string, but the one closest to you. And then when you pull your hand back up, you kind of move your hand, you rotate your wrist a little bit, and it catches that 5th string, the high ding, the high G, and it goes ding. And then you can strum it rhythmically, and that's called frailing or clawhammer style. And so I didn't really grow up doing clawhammer style, but I got interested in it. It's a more primitive sound, and it's very evocative. And people used to play that tuning, a lot of Appalachian, North Carolina type banjo players in tunings, and some of them were called modal tunings. And a modal means it doesn't sound either minor or major, because it doesn't have a third in it at all. It doesn't have a major third or a minor third, which is what, if it has a major third, it's a major chord. If it has a minor third, it's a minor chord. But instead it has a 4th, which is kind of an odd raised tone in the chord, and so it's called modal tuning. And it is a minor mode, but it's very ethereal sounding and very, very evocative. It's very kind of cinematic, if you will. And so I was screwing around with tunings and C tuning, dropped C tuning is very common on this style of banjo playing, which goes back to the Civil War. There's a lot of Civil War era kind of songs. In fact, I play one at the very, very end of Journey of the Sorcerer, that little major key, so it's in a minor vibe, modal vibe, and then at the very end of the song, when the fiddle comes in, we start playing a Civil War song, the name of which I'll think about in a second. Ask me again later.
The orchestration, did it build in your mind? Did it build in the studio? When did the orchestration become an idea for the song?
Well, it wasn't really. I can explain. This is an economic decision as much as anything else. So I just wrote this instrumental thing, and we were playing ideas, I guess, and it was later in the production of that album. And Jim Ed Norman did the string arrangement. For the Eagles, he did the string arrangement on Desperado, and then I can't remember what else has strings on it, an orchestral string section on this particular album. But the way that orchestral sessions work is, first of all, you have to hire an arranger, and then you hire the string players, which is usually somewhere between 12 and 18 string players. And it's a union session, and it lasts 3 hours on the dot, and you get as much recording as you can get done in the 3 hours, and then you're done. But I think we only had maybe one other song, maybe 2 to get done in that 3-hour session. So we said, well, we got enough time to do another song, so why don't we do an orchestral arrangement on Journey of the Sorcerer? So we did, because the other songs were essentially paying for the string session, if that makes any sense. So, but so it's one of the extremely few kind of funky folk banjo frailing songs that has a full string section on it, because who could afford that, right? Banjo being kind of a working class instrument anyway, and those styles are. I mean, it works really great, And then how it became theme song for the BBC radio and then TV series Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was simple. The writer of Hitchhikers, Douglas Adams, an English guy, he was a fan of the Eagles, and he bought the new LP when that one came out, and he had it on his turntable when BBC asked him, "Hey, we need a theme song for the radio show," and he went, "Okay," and then he just heard this that day on his turntable, so he played it. He went, "Yeah, that's perfect." So he rang up BBC. The English branch of Warner Brothers had the administration on the Eagles publishing at that point, and they gave him the song for a £500 fee, which was not too much. And so basically, they got the rights in England for £500, about $1,000 at the time. So much later, they made that one film of Hitchhiker's Guide. That's a type of that comes under a copyright law, under so-called synchronization part of copyright law. So they had to negotiate with me, and we got $175,000 for the rights for the film, but we only got £500 for the original TV show. And first of all, we had fun with the group because when we sang well, because and the reason why the Eagles. One of the main reasons that we had a good blend, other than the fact that Henley was a great singer and Meisner was a great singer, and I'd say Glenn Frey and I were like kind of pretty good singers. But those two guys, I think Meisner and Henley, were superior voices, but everybody was in their own range. So Meisner was a true first tenor, I was a true baritone. Henley could sing pretty high. We could all sing pretty high at that point, but when we sang in the stack, we were all in our own range, so everybody's comfortable and nobody sounds strained. Everybody's in full voice, and that's part of why it sounds so good.
When you joined Doug Dillard and Gene Clark for that debut Fantastic Expedition, you co-wrote 6 songs in that. Like, you must have went in there and felt incredibly welcome because you were a big part of that.
Yeah, let me tell you how that's kind of interesting how that album came about, right? So I was living on Doug Dillard's couch, basically, in his house in Hollywood Hills. I was doing sessions, but I didn't have enough money for my own place at that point. Hearts and Flowers was the first group I joined when I came out in August of '67, and after a year that folded. Doug was just a banjo hero of mine, so I started hanging out with him, and he said, "You can stay on my couch." I was like, okay. So we'd be sitting around. We'd play at night with no picks, pretty late at night, but a couple other people started coming by, the mandolin player and that bass player, Don Beck and David Jackson, and we would just sit around in Doug's house, which had high ceilings and stucco walls, and it sounded really good in there, acoustic music. So Gene Clark lived nearby, the former singer from the Byrds, and he would come by, and he was a good harmonica player, and he would just sit in and listen, and we were just playing instrumentals. And Gene would come back the next day with lyrics for 2 or 3 of the songs. We're like, whoa, it's a song. And then we'd work up the harmonies. So we did that for only about a week and a half, 2 weeks tops. And all of a sudden, we had about 12 songs. See, I had co-written some of the instrumentals with Douglas. So when Gene put the lyrics on it, I was automatically a writer. And like Train Leaves Here This Morning, he came back with that set of lyrics. And I gave him the chords for the B section of that song. So that's all I really contributed to Train Leaves Here This Morning. But so then Gene Clark had a solo deal on A&M at that time, and he was in the middle of laboriously making a solo album, and for some reason it was taking quite a long time. And he played some of these songs or a tape or something, I don't know, for the producer. He went, wait a minute, that sounds awesome. Why don't we do that album instead? So we went in, he had us in the next week, because he already had the authorization for an album on A&M, and he just used the budget to record us in about a week. We did the whole album in a week, done, and they released it, and that was it. So, boom.
You ever thought of writing, there's been a lot of Eagles books out there. How come there's not a Bernie Leadon Eagles book?
Well, for one thing, you said I don't do too many interviews, but in my opinion, I've done enough interviews to be a book, so I don't really need to write the book.
When you joined the Flying Burrito Brothers, again, going into this big fold that was their second album, I understand, were you nervous? Were you excited? What was the vibe like for you going into that band?
Into the Burritos?
Yeah.
Well, so Dillard and Clark, we started out this acoustic thing in Doug Dillard's living room, as I said. Then we made that album. Then we were able to play a gig, but somewhere in there, like very early on, Doug and Gene Clark decided we should get a drummer, right? Well, if you put a drummer with an acoustic group, either that he better play awfully quietly, or you guys have to plug in and become electric. But he was wanting to do, Gene Clark, the singer, was wanting to do some Elvis songs, and he was, so all of a sudden he's like, well, if I'm going to perform, I want to be more impressive or something, I guess. So we went and got some amps. I had an electric guitar. I'd played, I didn't really play country music, so all of a sudden I'm learning how to play country lyrics and I got a Telecaster. And pretty soon we did this gig at the Troubadour, and the band basically didn't survive the 1 week gig. So Dillard and Clark fell apart, and so I needed a job. And right at that time, we were on A&M. Gene was signed to A&M, and the Dillard and Clark album was on A&M Records, and so were the Burrito Brothers. So we were all on the same lot. It was the old Charlie Chaplin movie lot in Hollywood, which where their offices and studios were. So when we were on the lot, the old film lot, and in those studios, we would run into the Burrito guys. I knew Hillman from San Diego from Bluegrass days. So maybe they heard that Dillard and Clark was falling apart, or I can't really remember that part, but I know I was in touch with Chris, and so he rang me up and said, hey, man, we're going to make our second album, and our bass player, Chris Etheridge, left, so I'm going to play bass, and we want you to come and play guitar. And I just said, okay, I needed a job, man. So needed a job and a place to live, I just followed my nose. So then equally at the end of 2 years with the Burritos, I went to one of the folky guitar stores that also had a showroom in the back, McCabe's Guitar Shop in Santa Monica. And I went in there. There was, they sold LP records, they sold instruments, they gave lessons, they offered lessons to people in different styles. They had a repair shop, and they put the concerts on in the back, and had people like Bill Monroe or interesting people come. It was a good showroom too. And so anyway, it was a nexus. That's the point. It was a nexus in the music business in Santa Monica at that time for people like me that had a bit of a folk, that had been connected to the folk era. And so I went in there when the Burritos were kind of falling apart. Graham Parsons had left or been fired. Chris came home with Rick Roberts one day, and then we made this kind of soft rock album, that third Burrito album, the first one with Rick Roberts. And I thought, well, that's good. Rick's a good singer. Those are good, decent songs. But that's not why I came here. I came here to play with Sneaky Pete, Graham and Chris. And Sneaky Pete was gone. Graham was gone. And so I was looking for something to do. And I just told the girl behind the counter that I knew, or she said, how's it going? And I say, I think I'm thinking about leaving the Burritos. And she said, instantly, she said, you should call Don and Glenn. They're putting together a band, I hear. And I was like, really? And so I called their manager, or I called the guy they'd been working with Linda Ronstadt. I'd worked with Ronstadt before. So anyway, I called John Boylan, who was Ronstadt's producer and manager at that point. I said, I hear Don and Glenn are putting together a group. Are you connected to that? And he goes, well, I'm not sure yet, but, I'll pay for a rehearsal hall at Studio Instrument Rentals in a rehearsal room, and you guys see what it's like. And so we went down there and played. Meisner was already part of it, and I was the fourth one, and we played and went, okay, we're a band. And then Fry was already signed to David Geffen for management, and he was about to get dropped. So Glenn was wanting to put something together, and he and Henley had agreed to work together. So anyway, after about a week, we went, okay, we're a band. So we walked into Geffen's office and said, hey, we're a band. Here we are. Do you want us or not? And he goes, well, he came to one rehearsal and he went, yeah, okay. So things just fell together. But the music business, meaning folk and folk rock and country rock, that kind of stuff, it was really a small town on the west side of L.A. pretty much. There was just a few places where people congregated, There was the Troubadour Club, the Ash Grove Club, which had been a folk club also in Hollywood, West Hollywood. And then there was the McCabe's Guitar Shop. And then down in the South Bay, there was a couple of places, the Golden Bear and a couple others. And those were the 4 or 5 places to play in L.A. area. And then there were a few up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then every college town had a club that was like that. And there was a little string of clubs on the East Coast in New York, Boston, Washington, D.C., and that was the folk circuit that people used to work acoustically. And so those are the places we all still hung out, And So it was really like a small town of community of interest, if you will, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So even though there were millions and millions of people in L.A., we ignored all those people. We were just focused on people who had like interests, you know. Well, both in a sense. I mean, the sound of my guitar being, you know, and the fact that it had a phaser on it. I think I had just bought a phaser and they weren't really in common use yet. And I think we doubled it too on the record. So the sound on the beginning of the song is me playing electric guitar with the phaser, and then doubled, so that's doubly phased also. And then Fry playing the acoustic guitar. I think on the basic, I played electric and he played acoustic. And sometimes we would reverse. Sometimes we'd both play acoustic on the basic, and then one of us would overdub an electric. But as far as the composition, like who came up with the riff and all that, I think he came up with the basic chords, but I came up with the way of playing them, the way I voiced it, and the lick in between, you know. The da 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 da. That was mine. Witchy Women, you know, there's different ways to co-write songs, but I wrote all the music basically for the Witchy Woman song, all the, you know, the da 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 da, that whole thing, that whole thing. I wrote it as a guitar instrumental basically, the sections of the song. Henley wrote all the lyrics. I wrote a bunch of songs with the Eagles and sang them, but the only ones that they basically wanted me to sing on stage, except for right after we did the Desperado album. Right after that, I think. Like when we did the concert at Santa Monica Civic, we did the entire album front to back, Desperado, and I sang Bitter Creek and 21, the banjo song. But other than that, I didn't continue singing those songs because they weren't hits. And you know, as the band went on, we had more hits, and so more hits became part of the show. And so basically, Henley and Fry only wanted me to sing Train Leads Through This Morning in the show back in 1975, and therefore, since this History Of tour was kind of me getting plugged back in, they basically said, you're singing Train Leads Through This Morning. I went, okay. And that was it. You know, I had other ideas for what I might do, but they didn't agree. So that was it. But I mean, I like the song.
Oh, yeah, it's a great tune. Did that take hoaxing? Who called you up? How did that happen?
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, I kind of talked about it when we did the documentary. So I didn't, you know, I mean, I had poured the beer on Glenn's head, you know, at a band meeting in 1975, and then agreed to leave. You know, I said I'm going to leave the band, and it was about 4 months till the end of the year. And I said, let's do good shows and, you know, do it to prove how good we can do them, and then I'll be gone. And then, so I didn't realize that the pouring the beer on his head though was going to be this giant thing, you know, in social media essentially too. So, but one time after Wikipedia became established, and I looked at my own entry in Wikipedia, it basically said, Bernie Leadon left the band because he poured a beer on Glenn Fry's head, which I thought, well, that's kind of a funky legacy on Wikipedia. It's like they don't talk about my guitar playing; they just talk about me pouring a beer on Glenn's head. So then I became a recovering alcoholic, and when you do recovery work, one of the things you do is you realize who you harmed, and then you become willing to make amends to them. So I realized I had to make an amends to Glenn. I tried to get a hold of him to talk to him, and he didn't want to respond. So you write him a certified letter. So I did that, return receipt, you know, so I knew he got it. Sent it to his office, sent it certified, and I didn't hear anything back for like 5-6 years. And then the request came to do the documentary that preceded the History Of tour. And it was on Showtime in the U.S., and it was sold on DVD. So in the documentary, I basically, because I was asked the question, what about pouring the beer on Glenn's head? And I said, well, I made an amends to him. I sent him a letter, and and I regret it, and so forth. And I said it wasn't a cool thing to do, and I regret it, and I've apologized to him. So shortly after that footage was seen by them in pre-production for the documentary, I got a call from the manager, Irving, saying, hey, we're thinking about doing a History Of tour and wonder if you'd be interested. And if you are, Glenn would like to talk to you. And I said, yeah, I would be interested. I don't know what the parameters are, but let's talk about it. So then Glenn called me. And in the course of that conversation, he said, I got your letter and appreciated it. And the fact that he was calling me was, evidence that he felt better about things. So, but the fact that I cleared that up with him and apologized was the reason that it became possible for them to consider having me. And ironically, they wouldn't work with Felder because he'd sued them and so forth, so they weren't going to work with him. And Meisner wasn't really physically up to it. So I became the only one that was available to come back to from the past.
We'll have part 2 of our interview with former Eagles member Bernie Leadon in the next few days. Check out the description. There's links to the video of this interview, the podcast, and the individual slices on our sister channel, Rock History Music. Remember to share our chat, comment, and subscribe. I'm John Bowden from Rock History Book.